I put a couple examples here. I'm going to just chime in here, and then we'll have Mike share as well. But these are two examples of builds that we have completed. So the one on the left, a little 20-foot tiny home. That one ended up going to a location with lower building regulation. The one on the right, multiple containers combined. This one is in Joshua Tree, California. And if you're familiar with California, you might be familiar with the fact that there is higher building regulations, higher safety code, which ultimately impacts the cost of the build. So this is an example just to show you you can build container homes very affordably depending on where you're located and depending on your design. And then on the flip side, there are some locations where you can expect to be paying a premium because they have higher building regulations, higher building codes, and how your design will impact that and have a direct correlation to that. Before we go to the next slides where we'll kind of break more of this down, anything you want to share right there, Mike?
Yeah, Tony. I mean, to share the cliche saying is location, 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 right? I mean, every location is different. Every part of North America or throughout the world is different. Zoning codes, regulations, minimum square footage requirements. A lot of municipalities don't understand what a metal building is, let alone a container structure is. So there's education that takes place there, and we find ourselves in Florida, which is one of the most challenging environments to build. Just to get things out of the ground here takes a really long time. Our permitting process in Florida is quite long due to all the codes and regulations. I mean, we have wind load codes, wind velocities. We get hurricanes, as you all know, and we've started off our journey at Containing Luxury to build or try to build our containers to Miami-Dade County hurricane code structures, which is some of the most stringent building codes in the country. So we started off there, full impact hurricane doors and windows. And of course, we can water that down as needed for cost savings. But we started to make these things bulletproof and be to those standards. And then obviously we can relax as different areas around the country have different standards. And obviously in Indiana, we probably don't have hurricanes as much as we do down in Florida. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about what some of those requirements are in your area, because I think you're right. Florida definitely has much higher regulations than some other areas, especially with the hurricanes and everything that's going on out there. So looking here at this next slide, we pretty much put together this idea of like, hey, your cost is going to be directly influenced by these 6 factors. So these are all things that are going to ultimately influence your cost. So when someone asks, how much does it cost to build a container home? There isn't a pat answer to that, right? There really is a lot of variables that we have to consider. And so the very first one at the top is just type of build. Now, I want to share with you a couple different variations and what I mean by type of build. So number one, there is a permitted build that's going on a foundation. Just like these two that we showed you on the previous slide, it can vary depending on your location, what's going to be required to accomplish that. And we'll break down more of what that really means. But then by type of build, I also mean, and you'll see it on some future slides here as well, is we are able to do units that are on wheels. And this is also something that Containing Luxury is doing, where we're able to get a unit that's RVIA certified. It's considered a movable tiny home. And there are more areas that are starting to allow people to do that. And sometimes the regulation process to do a movable tiny home can be much simpler than a permitted tiny home. And so definitely could be something to consider if you're doing more of an ADU type structure where it's going in your backyard or something like that. Number 2, we have location of build. Mike, do you want to go over maybe a couple more of these ones?
Yeah, location and build. So let's talk about type of build, right? That's a big thing. And those of you who follow our YouTube channel, we did a very my partner Blake, or our CEO, I should say, of Containing Luxury, Blake Magid, he enveloped on a journey of what he thought was going to be a 4 to 6 month build of a multi-container structure on a property out in Texas, just outside of San Antonio. And that build extrapolated into about a little over a year. So the complexities that come in, and again, Blake, our CEO, he's a well-experienced builder. I mean, almost 2 decades in making and working with commercial and residential construction. So, it took us a long time to kind of figure out a multi-container build on a piece of unrestricted land in Texas. So what I mean by unrestricted is, hey, have at it, no codes, kind of go figure it out and build what you want. So when you work with multi-containers, you start cutting out walls and floors and ceilings, and you're matching and marrying containers. Again, there's a lot of lessons learned there. You get some good laughs on the videos, but the complexity, I would say, triples when you try to do that. So we've learned what we do is we crank out units, usually single 40, single 20s, and we try to kind of Henry Ford this model and just kind of crank them out in our factory. And it's a lot less complexity. It's a quicker speed to market. And again, when you start cutting walls and you're compromising the integrity of the containers themselves, you have to go back and rebrace and restructure. And for a lot of folks who are doing this for the first time or novice or not used to working with metal buildings, it can be quite daunting, time consuming, and very costly lessons to be learned.
That's really good. Yeah, that's a really good point, Mike. I've noticed from our experience combining and connecting containers too, it was a learning curve. You would think, and I think what made it maybe even more challenging is most of the stuff that we're doing, we're building at our facility in Vegas and then sending it, 1,000 miles away and hoping everything fits the same. And the reality is it doesn't,
Yep.
It goes on a truck. It
Yep.
could be bending slightly. It gets craned. The foundation on the other end might not be just perfect. So when you go to connect the two containers or line them up, like you mentioned, it's some troubleshooting for sure. So yeah, I think what Mike said is excellent. And it ties into some of these other points too. Point number 3 and 4, size of build, complexity of build. So a lot of these go hand in hand. Of course, number 5, quality of materials and finishes. And then lastly, your personal contribution to the build. So is this a project that you are completely passing off to someone else to build for you? If you are, that's great. But of course, you are paying a premium to have someone kind of take the brunt of the effort and get this build to completion for you. Or are you trying to take it on a little bit more yourself? Maybe it's just aspects of the build yourself in order to save some money.
Yeah, and one quick talking point there, Tony. And again, not multi-container structures, multi-container builds are amazing. I think there's some of the coolest properties on the planet, and if they're done well. But I would say when you take on these endeavors, and if you're a novice or the first time, find help. Reach out to someone who's done this before, an engineer, an architect has worked with containers. It can save you a lot of time, energy, and trouble. And I would say this as a general rule of thumb: if you're doing this for the first time with a multi-container build on a piece of property you might be familiar or unfamiliar with, take your budget and your timeline and just triple it. Whatever you think it is, just triple it, time and money, and you'll likely come out okay. That's the best advice I think we can give you, having walked this path more than a few times.